Peace, everybody. You are now listening to the Classroom and the Cell podcast. This is Marc Lamont Hill.
And this is Mumia Abu Jamal.
Mumia, there has been such a push in the last 3 or 4 years to talk about mass incarceration, abolition, all of these issues that a long time ago seemed impossible. Suddenly, after the killing of George Floyd, after the mass movements in Minnesota, we've started to hear people say abolition, defund, all of these words. But that was 2020. Now it's 2023 going into 2024. And I ask myself, is abolition still at the forefront of our political imagination? And is it something that we can still see achievable?
Well, if it's not, then it should be. And it's certainly, I mean, I'm a biased observer, right? But it's certainly, right?
Fair enough.
My attention, yeah, hey, I've only been here, like, as long as you've been alive, right?
Right.
But it should be. And think about this. Angela Davis wrote a book. And I'm trying to think of the title, but it was...
Are Prisons Obsolete?
Are Prisons Obsolete? And that had to be 2000?
Yeah.
Somewhere in that region. And I remember talking to my big sister, right? And, you know, she had become a nationalist, you know, and she, you know, we all often had militant and political, you know, conversations. And I was talking to her, and I was reading the book, and I was discussing it with her, and she said, "Moon, come on, man." She said, "Abolish prisons. Come on, that's just a little too far for me." she said, I look, there's some dudes that need to be in prison. And, you know, she couldn't even begin to open her imagination to a world without prison. And a world, you know, we have to understand that in most of human life, that is human existence on this planet, they were not prisons.
Right.
It was a new institution. And what we have in the middle of the 20th century is an even newer institution, which is mass incarceration. And instead of dealing with issues of crime, it's dealing with issues...
This is a call from
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Mahanoy.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
It's dealing with issues not just of superfluous populations, and I use that term, I think, as closely as possible to reflect that reality, right? Real stuff. But also of the deindustrialization of whole areas of the American economy. I think recently we mentioned, when we were talking about like right-wing fascist organizations, NAFTA, and how the right wing has kind of put their hooks into that to try to attract working class people to their movement. And the truth is, there is truth to that. When NAFTA happened, because capital cares more about profit than labor, and it made good sense to take jobs first to Mexico in what they called the maquiladores, where they had no Social Security, no EPA, no nothing, and paid pesos to poor Mexican workers. And then, when that wasn't enough, they fled to Vietnam. And ultimately, they went to China. You know, the biggest GM manufacturers in the world are in China. And it's all about cheap labor, the cheapest labor they could find, because the cheaper the labor, the more the profit. The more the profit. And that's all capital cares about. They only care about labor when labor forces them through strikes and denying their labor, right?
Yeah.
The share that labor should receive. So
See, that framework, that outline is exactly why the struggle to dismantle the prison industrial complex is so challenging, right? It's because there are forces of capital.
This is a call from
Pennsylvania State Correctional Institution, Mahanoy.
This call is subject to recording and monitoring.
There are forces of capital that uphold the prison industrial complex. There are forces of capital that are empowered and strengthened for every minute that there are people who are caged. And, until there's not a profit invested in the exploitation of labor and a profit invested in the caging of people, the surveillance of people, the control of people, the coercion of people, the criminalization of people, until we take the profit out of that, then this system is not going to be easily dismantled. I think that's why, it's so important to link a critique of the prison industrial complex to a critique of capitalism. There is no abolition without capitalism. And I think part of the challenge in 2020 was we started talking about defunding police, which can be a tactic and a strategy toward abolition, or it can be a step short. But in all the cases, until we link that to a conversation about dismantling capital, we're not going to get where we want to be. And I think it was politically palatable at a moment where black folk were getting shot in the street to say, we need to reimagine policing. People could buy into that. They could say, all right, well, I don't know about like your sister. I got a whole bunch of folk like, Richard Pryor said it, right? I hated prison until I went to prison. There's also certain people I was like, thank God for prison, right? There are people who have that mentality. There are people who can't imagine a world outside of policing and prisons. We can persuade them, but even as we offer them other possibilities, as long as capital looms so large, as long as these structures of human exploitation loom so large, we're always going to bump into resistance that's not easily surmountable. We can't just wait it out.
No, you're absolutely correct. But here's the other side of the coin. You can't talk about mass incarceration without talking about the Clinton administration and how they kind of bent over backwards to bring life to mass incarceration at a level and on a scale that had never been seen before in modern American society. And what they did was actually very clever, because they turned around and said, how can we get white workers, especially rural white workers, to buy into this? And they said, we'll build prisons. They'll have jobs for generations, great paying jobs, state jobs, with a state union, and there will never be an end. People will build their houses and buy their cars and live a good life in rural America on caging the excess population drawn from the ghettos of America.
Man, I just want to give an example of that for the people who may not understand. I used to visit you when you were on 175 Progress Drive, right? And that's a hell of an address for a prison.
Ain't it though?
Man, and I would fly. I remember when I would fly to Pittsburgh and then drive to Waynesburg, right, and to SCI Green, and it was wild, man, because on the way there I would stop at gas stations, and the only people in the gas station fueling and getting snacks were people going to visit people in the prison. I would go to the waiting area, and I remember getting there during a guard shift. And the last thing you want to do when you visit somebody in prison is get there right before guard shift, because your shift change, because you got to wait for more white men, more white men walking through a hallway than you ever imagined. About an hour, right? And I remember one time, man, they were sitting there, they were talking, and it was like, I was like, y'all all know each other? They was like, well, most of us went to high school together, or we're all from the same town. And I was like, It's got to be the whole damn town of Waynesburg.
The whole damn town.
Yeah. So if you don't work as a CO, you might be the electrician. You might be catering, right? You're doing something there, because if not, like you just said, you're not working. And so like the entire town has an investment.
That's the point.
Right. But nobody in half the prison I saw on death row was from Philly.
Half the people in the prison were from Philly, if not 75%.
Right.
Yeah. And so, but the mind that thought that up, right, was brilliant, but malevolent, because they locked it in with that economic imperative. And like I'm now in another county, in another side of the state, but it's like a mirror image of Greene County because both of these were mining communities. And the mines are gone. America really, maybe in Kentucky they have mines. But most Americans who worked in mines are unemployed or in new jobs if they're working because mining is gone. It's not economically feasible, right, to have American miners because other places do it better and do it cheaper. And this was a mining community, and Greene was a mining community. And those mines are gone. Or should I say gone? They've been transformed into the new mines that we call prisons.
Mm. Wow.
And we the black gold, bruh.
You ain't never lied, man. You ain't never. So what do you see as a way to continue the energy and the move forward? Like in the Trump era, we were resisting. Then you get Biden, who says, "Well, I'm pro-cop, right? I'm pro this, right?" And there isn't as much of a conversation about the defunding. It's still happening. Abolition has never stopped. People are still organizing. We're still planning. We're still theorizing. We're still strategizing. I'm not saying that. But in terms of the public conversation, how do we get it back into the public dominant conversation?
Well, you have to talk about two things. And I think, first of all, is the cost, because the cost is prohibitive. I mean, the DOC snatches about $3 billion a year from the state budget. And even though the population is down about 10,000 from what it was like 5 years ago, it's still, this is a huge economic investment. Here's the problem. It's an investment that does not work because when you think about, capital is about making things that work and then selling those things. Prison doesn't work because people don't come out of prison like, oh, I got a better head, I can get a gig. They go out thinking about doing the same thing they thought about doing when they came in.
Right.
Because recidivism has got to be 70% in most states, in like Pennsylvania. So until that is transformed, all you have is the revolving door where cats are doing life on the installment plan.
Ooh, life on the installment plan. Just back and forth.
In and out. You know what I mean? And what it is a form of predation. Call it by its name. Predation. And what Angela talked about is transforming prisons into educational institutions. Right?
Mm.
That dealt with people and gave them an ability to learn how not to open the doors to these places, right?
Right.
So, education solves many problems, but most importantly, it opens up minds.
You have 1 minute left.
What people have learned over the years, there's a book called On Violence, and it talks about the Massachusetts DOC. And the guy that was the head of the DOC psychology department began seeing how lifers got out and never came back. The one thing he found out that was consistent with lifers who left and never came back?
What's that?
All of them had an education.
Mm.
All of them had a degree. You going out and you got a degree, you ain't going to sling nothing on no corner.
Right.
You might be slinging books.
Right.
But you ain't hustling because you
and the thing is, education is the one thing they cut out of.
That's the one thing.
Yeah.
Brother Bill, the first black president, Bill Clinton, cut all of that.
Right. No Pell Grants. Yep. All of it. They shutting down prison libraries. Now they don't even want books to get into the prison, which we're going to talk about in another episode, man.
Thank you for using Securus. Goodbye.
Love you too, man. On the move. Everybody, you've been listening to the Classroom and the Cell podcast. We want to thank you for listening. Make sure you check out all the episodes that are there on the site. You go to YouTube, Marc Lamont Hill Official. Again, it's on the Marc Lamont Official YouTube channel. You subscribe, you listen, and you share. We love y'all. We appreciate y'all. On the move.